Good morning. I'm Stephen Leake. I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church of Mesquite, Texas, and I'm also the teacher of the Discipleship Sunday School class there. Today we're continuing with our study of the Gospel of John, and today we'll finish chapter 2 and begin chapter 3. So let's start off where we finished off last week at the very end of chapter 2. Our verses today are chapter 2, 23 and 25. Now please recall that this happens after the cleansing of the temple, when Jesus was in Jerusalem for the first Passover recorded by the Gospel writer John. When he was in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, many believed in his name because they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, would not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to testify about anyone, for he himself knew what was in everyone. John does not relate the story of any wonder that Jesus did in Jerusalem at this Passover season, but Jesus did do wonders there, and there were many who, when they saw his powers, believed in him. Here John is trying to explain why Jesus did not openly declare himself to be the Messiah. The answer is that Jesus knew human nature only too well. He knew that there were many whose interest in him would be short-lived. He knew that there were many who were attracted only by the sensational things that he did. And he knew that there were none who understood the way that he had chosen. He knew that there were many who would have followed him while he continued to produce miracles and wonders and signs. But he also knew that if he talked about service or self-denial or surrender to the will of God, they would have left him. It's a great characteristic of Jesus that he did not want followers unless they clearly knew and accepted what was involved in following him. He refused to cash in on a moment's popularity. If he had entrusted himself to the mob in Jerusalem, they would have declared him the Messiah, then and there, and would have waited for the kind of action they expected the Messiah to take. But Jesus was a leader who refused to ask anyone to accept him until the full implications of that acceptance were understood. He insisted that people should know what they were doing. Jesus knew human nature. He knew the fickleness and instability of human hearts. He knew that people can be swept away in a moment of emotion and then back out when they discover what that decision really means. He knew how human nature hungers for the spectacular. He did not want a crowd cheering for something they did not understand. He wanted a small company who knew what they were doing and who were prepared to follow him until the end. There's one thing we must note about this passage, for we'll have an occasion to mark it again and again. When John speaks of Jesus' miracles, he calls them signs. The New Testament uses 3 different words for the wonderful works of God and of Jesus, and each one has something to tell us about what a miracle is. First, it uses the word teres. Teres simply means a marvelous thing. It's a word with no moral significance at all. A magic trick or an illusion might be called a teres. It's simply an astonishing happening which leaves people surprised. The New Testament never uses this word by itself, when speaking of the works of God or of Jesus. Second, it uses the word dunamis. Dunamis literally means power, and it's the word from which dynamite comes. It can be used of any kind of extraordinary power: the power of nature, the power of human genius, or the power of a medical treatment or a drug. It always has the meaning of an effective power which does things which anyone can recognize. Third, it uses the word semeion. Semeion means a sign. It's John's favorite word. To him, a miracle was not an astonishing happening. It was not simply a deed of power. It was a sign. That is to say, it told people something about the person who did it. It revealed something of his character, and it laid bare something of his nature. To John, the supreme thing about the miracles of Jesus was that they told people something about the nature and the character of God. The power of Jesus was used to heal the sick, to feed the hungry, and to comfort the troubled. The fact that Jesus used his power in that way was proof that God cared for the sorrows and the needs and the pains of men and women. To John, the miracles were signs of God's love. And there are three components to any miracle. There's the wonder, which leaves people dazzled and astonished. And there's the power, which can deal with any situation. And there is the sign, which tells us of the love in the heart of God, who does such great things for us. Now we're going to begin chapter 3 with the story of Nicodemus. Now this is kind of a long story, and it'll take us more than one session to deal with it. So we're going to do the first part of the story today. And then we'll pick the other part up next week. So, if you'll follow along with me, John 3, verses 1 through 6. Now there was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews. He came to Jesus by night and said to him, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one else can do these signs that you do apart from the presence of God." But Jesus answered him, "Very truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above." Nicodemus said to him, "How can anyone be born after having grown old? Can one enter a second time into the mother's womb and be born?" Jesus answered, "Very truly, no one can enter the kingdom of God without being born of water and spirit. What is born of the flesh is flesh, and what is born of the spirit is spirit." For the most part, we see Jesus surrounded by ordinary people. But here we see him in contact with the aristocracy of Jerusalem. There are certain things we know about Nicodemus. First, Nicodemus must have been wealthy. When Jesus died, Nicodemus brought for his body a mixture of myrrh and aloes weighing about 100 pounds. And that's from John 19:39. Only a wealthy man could have bought that. Second, Nicodemus was a Pharisee. Now, in many ways, the Pharisees were the best people in the whole country. And there were never more than 6,000 of them. They were always known as a chabara, or brotherhood. They entered into this brotherhood by taking a pledge in front of 3 witnesses that they would spend all their lives observing every detail of the scribal law. The name Pharisee means separated one. The Pharisees were those who had separated themselves from all ordinary life in order to keep every detail of the law as interpreted by the scribes. So it is astonishing that a man who had given himself to that kind of life in the conviction that he was pleasing God would wish to talk to Jesus at all. Third, Nicodemus was a ruler of the Jews. That is to say, he was a member of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was a court of 70 members and was the supreme court of the Jews. Of course, under the Romans, its powers were more limited than once they had been. In particular, the Sanhedrin had religious jurisdiction over every Jew in the world. And one of its duties was to examine and deal with anyone suspected to be a false prophet. It's amazing that Nicodemus should come to see Jesus at all. Fourth, it may well be that Nicodemus belonged to a distinguished Jewish family. The history of the Jews mentions several people who performed important tasks, who had the family name Nicodemus. Nicodemus came to Jesus by night. There were probably two reasons for that. First, it may have been a sign of caution. He may not have wished to commit himself to being a follower of Jesus by coming to see him during the day. The beauty of this story is that he overcame his prejudices and his upbringing and his whole view of life enough to come to Jesus. Second, the rabbis declared that the best time to study the law was at night when it could be done undisturbed. During the day, Jesus was surrounded by crowds, and Nicodemus might have just wanted a private, undisturbed time with Jesus. He came to Jesus for a talk so that somehow he might find something that was lacking in his life. Thank you. That's our lesson for today. And next week, we'll continue with the study of Jesus and Nicodemus. God bless.